Alright, welcome back. I'm Multimeteor, and this is Magic 2014, otherwise known as Duels of the Planeswalkers 2014. And I am taking a look at the Masks of Dimir deck. I'm really, really anxious, or if anxious, I'm really, really happy about them including a Dimir deck, even though that it didn't start out to be that interesting. Well, interesting, yes, but well executed, maybe not so much. But once you've unlocked everything, I thought that the deck turned out to be pretty interesting, nonetheless, and it actually has some potential. There are definitely some matchups that it's going to have a hard time against, but yeah, let's take a look at it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what's not included in the deck, but I will just show you quickly. I haven't included Dire Undercurrents, Mind Leech Mass, the two threats of disloyalty. The reason for the Mind Leech Mass has been taken out is because it's just too expensive. The same with Diluvian Primordial, Guardian of the Ages, Dimir Guild Mage. I've took out one. Well, not the same for Dimir Guild Mage, but taken out one. Same goes for Moroi. I've taken out one Lobotomy, Dinrova Horror. I really like it, but it does too little and too late for too much. So Sleep, Fool's Demise, yeah. Taken out like a bunch of these cards. I'm not going to go into it too much, but you can see what I've taken out. What I'd rather go into is the cards that I've included. So far, I've included one Terramorphic Expanse. I might include more, but this is all about the card draw. So far, I haven't had too much trouble drawing the lands, but it certainly requires you to have a pretty good setup in terms of a good starting hand, something that will get you going. And as soon as you got that, you are off to the races, in my opinion. So I might change this at some point if it turns out that it's not very efficient. Then again, I might not. Might just keep it. The curve is sort of wonky, but it makes sort of sense, I think. I have a couple of Thought Scours, which I think the fact that it mills is not that important. The fact that it draws you a card is more important. But the fact that it mills can also be, or it gives you some information about your opponent's deck and what he's not able to play at that point in time after you played it. And also, there are some ways to mill with this deck. It's not the most important strategy of the deck, but as I've said previously, milling is not only a win condition. It is also a strategy for gaining information and for taking options out of your opponent's hand. So if you can play this on turn one, it'll give you an extra card, a little bit of advantages in that respect, and take some options out of your opponent's hand. Um, Also, since I've unlocked all the cards playing against the AI, it's definitely a very, very good card to play on turn one against the encounters, because the whole decks for the encounters is built the way that they usually start with a handful of lands, and then they get all the cards that you're supposed to or that they're supposed to drop in a certain sequence. So you kind of mess up that sequence by using Thought Scour. So I might have, like deluded myself a little bit by having a lot of success playing against the AI, but I like the card so far. I might take it out at some point, but so far the cantrip effect makes it worth it. Dimir Guild Mage, I considered running all four of them, just because, not because it's the greatest thing in the world, but it is a 2/2 bear, and it is not something that you might want to trade with another 2/2, unless that you have enough of them, and four is certainly enough of them. But its ability later on in the game, like it's not that valuable when it comes into play on turn two, but once you start, hitting once you start getting into those turns where you don't necessarily have anything to drop, you can take control of your opponent a little bit, or his hand, by forcing him to discard, or you can draw yourself an extra card, and that'll change the pace a little bit of the match. And these should be part of your strategy, I think, or at least they're part of mine. Ravenous Rats, I was never a huge fan of them, but the fact that they put your opponent in an irritating position actually helps this deck out quite a bit. Counter Squall, I haven't really used it all that much, but any kind of counter spell which also forces your opponent to lose life is a nice Dimir-ish way of disrupting their plans. So I like that. I'm running 3 last gasps. I might end up putting putting the last the final of the 4 into the deck, back into the deck, because it's a great removal spell, and it's a great combat trick. Um, the only thing I don't like about it is the fact that it doesn't destroy or kill your opponent's creatures, but it certainly does so if your opponent's creature is a toughness 3 creature or less, but there are also other encounters where it's not that useful. Treasure hunt can be really, really good. In the worst case scenario, it draws you a card, which is not a land. In the best case scenario, it draws you a bunch of lands and a card, so pretty good. And here are some part of the reason that I kind of like this deck now is because of the Cipher cards, which are unlocked kind of late. Hands of Binding, all of the Cipher cards are obviously from Gatecrash, and I'm really psyched about them actually adding Gatecrash spells into the mix. Um, the cool thing about Cipher is that you just keep, like, you put it on, you put this spell on a, well, there are several cool things. You put the spell on a creature which are able to get in, like a flyer or an unblockable or something like that. And the first time you cast, or when you cast the spell, the effect triggers, and then when you do combat damage, perhaps in the same turn, the effect triggers again. So you're able to, with this spell, tie your opponent's side quite a bit, and it does make a difference. It makes your somewhat insignificant creatures into somewhat powerful creatures on the board. So I kind of like that. Chittering Rats is not that great on board, but it's really, really great coming into play because it changes the pace a little bit. Um, not only does it force your opponent to put a card from his or her hand on top of his or her library, it makes it so that this person is not going to draw a new card. So in some occasions, it's not going to be making a big difference because they are sitting with the very card that they're going to play in their hand, and they're just going to be drawing it the next turn. But in other occasions, they are relying on the next card they draw, or they are relying on that top draw, and Chittering Rats will kind of obstruct that. So that's why I think I run all of them, because they are tempo changers. Consult the Necrosages is a decent card, not amazing, but the fact that it draws you 2 cards for 3 is really good, and the fact that it forces, the fact that you can choose to force your opponent to discard 2 cards is also really good. It is very close and similar to Mind Rot, except that it gives you options. Sure, it costs a blue, but if you don't have a blue by then, if you only have 3 black, then you're doing something wrong, or you're very, very unlucky. The fact that you, and at the time that you want to be playing this, you are usually, you usually have the option. Like, you usually have an island, and you usually, what am I saying? What I'm trying to say is that at the point where you would be forcing your opponent to discard 2 cards, or considering drawing 2 cards, you probably have the lands for it. So it's 3 mana. That's what I spent so much time trying to say. Anyways, it's a great card. It gives you options, and it's really good. And here's another tempo changer, Time Ebb. The fact that it doesn't kill a creature would be like, well, there's a lot of non-killing going on with this Dimir deck. I thought they were supposed to be assassins and like all kinds of kooky, meddling information brokers and assassins and weirdos and ninjas and so on. Well, the thing about Time Ebb is that it also changes the pace because it takes a creature at your, like, which you choose, and put it back on its owner's library. So again, you're blocking your opponent from drawing a card, which is pretty good. Then you have divination. I just run one of them to draw me some cards if need be. I have mind rot. I have one of them, and yeah, just forces your opponent to discard 2 cards. Pretty good. Evil Twin is such a great card, especially against token decks or against decks that run the same, like multiple copies of a creature, because as soon as you have Evil Twin in play, um, you can kill all the creatures that it's a copy of. So if your opponent is running, like if your opponent is running clone or something and copying his creatures, you can just keep killing off those creatures with Evil Twin. Of course, it's a little slow, but it's still a pretty decent option, I would say. Very cool creature. Doomsday Spectre, it bounces a guy to your hand, but you could bounce your Chittering Rat and force your opponent to move a card from his hand onto the top of his library, or something else. I think there are other coming into play effects. Either way, Ravenous Rats, for example. But the cool thing about Doomsday Spectre is that you get to look at at your opponent's hand, and you get to force him to discard a certain card. So that's really, really good in my opinion. Then we have 3 Moroi, and I am still considering running the 4th because it's just a good card. Um, or let me say it's a 4/4 for 4. Sure, it forces you to lose life, but it has flying, so it's the best thing that you have in this deck. So yeah, Mark of the Vampire. Let me just say, I'm a little disappointed that there's no Gaslord of the Fugue, because that is kind of like the staple of this of Dimir. It should be here. Anyways, Mark of the Vampire. I run that to keep my life total somewhat pumped, and I run it to make my guys a little bigger so they can compete with my opponent's creatures. Lobotomy is supposedly really, really good, but it's somewhat rare that you get to pick the exact card that is just gonna destroy your opponent's game plan. But when you do, it's very, very satisfying. Um, I run one of them because I don't want to rely too heavily on this card, but I would like to have the option to mess up my opponent's plans. You have Sleep, and yeah, that's just the tempo game again. It's also a nice way of having your opponents get in and actually do some damage. You use their ciphered abilities and so on. Speaking of Cipher, Mental Vapors is just a nice way of forcing your opponent to discard. It's a little expensive for my taste, but I can understand why it costs as much as it does. The thing about it is that at this point, at land drop 4, you want to be doing something else. You want to be dropping creatures. You want to be um, reinforcing your board state. But if you can wait a little bit, if this is not your turn 4 play, but unless of course you have some creature that's able to get in at that point, then this is not a turn 4 play, but a later a play that or a spell that you're casting a little bit later on, and it's gonna do some work for you. Um, Illusionary Armor is great because it gives you creatures +4/+4, but it's very, very easy to remove that aura, so that kind of sucks. But I would say that it's super worth it, especially if you put it on Moroi. Get an 8/8, start swinging in, and put your opponent on a very, very fast moving clock. Beacon of Unrest is one of the reasons that you should be running Thought Scour, and is one of the reasons that all the discard spells and discard effects are good, because you can go ahead and steal a creature of one of your opponent's creatures. So that's very nice. You have Shadow Slice is one of my favorite cards from Gate Crash, being a Dimir fan. The fact that you could do, um, well, you can do 3 turns unconditionally, 3 points of damage unconditionally, but the fact that you can do 3 more the same turn and 3 more every turn after that, if you have a creature able to get in there, is so powerful. Put it on Moroi, and if your opponent doesn't have if he doesn't have a flying blocker, you're able to do 7 points of damage each turn, 10 points of damage the first turn. That is quite a clock. Then we have Necropolis Agent, and she's in there to be. She's a late game bomb. She will often not make. She will often not make it. The fact that she requires 3 swamps makes her a little difficult to cast. If she's on the table, you can be rest assured that your opponent is going to do everything in his or her power to remove it. That being said, if you get to swing in a couple of times with your creatures and do some combat damage to a player, they're going to be significant board presences. So it's absolutely worth running, in my opinion. Huh. Let's just, I think. Da, da, da. All right. Especially like this costs 8, and sure, it's good, but at this point in time, your opponent is not going to have a lot of spells in hand. Diluvian Primordial is so expensive, and it's, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't have continuous value. It's a 5/5 flyer for 7, and I mean its coming into play effect is good. But that being said, Necropolis Regent is just so much better. Smog Elemental is a little expensive, but the fact that you have so many flying creatures and the fact that it helps out all of your flying creatures a little bit is very, very significant in my opinion. Look at Ravnica, all covered in smog. All those poor Sky Knight Legionnaires and Liev Sky Knights and Griffins and so on, just engulfed in this Dimir-ish smog. And we have Stolen Identity, and it's a little expensive, but its effect is more than just a little crazy and incredible. The fact that you can clone a creature every turn if you get to swing in, the fact that you can clone a creature regardless of being able to swing in or not, is just very powerful. So I definitely run Stolen Identity. Then Avatar of Will. With this deck, and especially against faster opponents, you're going to get into situations where your opponent has 0 cards in hand. That's where you drop this bomb, like boom, 2 mana, 5/6 flyer, and that's going to change the board position significantly. So that's why I run it. Other cards that you could run: Vengeful Vampire, Flying Undying for 6. I think it's a little expensive. Plus, it's a 3/2. I wish it was. If it was a 4/3 with Flying and Undying, I think it would be. I think it would be kind of worth running 1 or 2 of them. Or if it was a 5 cost. But the fact, or even if it was a 4 cost 2/1 or a 4 cost 2/2 or something, I would definitely run it, because Undying is really powerful and it's nice to have. It's nice to have some board presence, which gives you value. But the fact that it's a 6 cost make it so that it's competing with these other high cost creatures for space in the deck, and I don't want it to be too expensive. It's already expensive as it is. I have an 8 cost, which should be cast as a 2 cost though, to be fair. You have 2 6 cost creatures, 1 a 6 cost spell. You have 4 5 cost spells, and then you have 9 4 cost spells, 7 3 cost spells, 11 2 cost spells, 2 1 cost spells, and a Terramorphic Expanse. So I don't think it's the heaviest deck. I think it's pretty light on its feet. You could if you would like to run it a little bit more tempo controlly, you could run Vidalcan Dismisser. There's a couple of 3 of those, and you have Dinrova Horror, which also bounces a creature or actually a permanent. and messes with your opponent's hand. The problem, as I see it, is that it's going to be very late, and you're not going to be able to play a lot of spells. Like you're not going to be able to play that second spell on the same turn unless you have a lot of mana down. So if these were cheaper, I would definitely run them. Being able to bounce your opponent's creatures not only back to his hand but back to his or her library is very powerful. But I think it's too expensive, and after you played it, it's just a 2/2. It's a very powerful ability for sure, but I think for the tempo game, it's a little too slow, especially when you have sliver decks and you have the Firewing, Flame Wave, I guess it's called, and you have Hunter Strength, and you have uh, Avacyn's Glory, and so on and so forth. You have very, very powerful and fast decks. Some of them are faster than the others, and some of them are just, like they create a board state that is very imposing from the early game. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't run too many expensive things. You want to be able to be able to participate in that game very early on. And even though I don't run a lot of early drop creatures, I have a lot of spells that messes with my opponent's creatures or hand or so on from early game. So yeah, this is my version of Masks of Dimir. I don't know if it's good or not. It's just, in my experience, it's been pretty efficient. And to be honest, it's a deck that took me a while to like, because while I was unlocking cards for it, it was one hell of like it was not a pleasant experience. It took me a while to be able to actually put something together that I was satisfied with and that I didn't get my ass handed to me with. It was very difficult, but I think once you've unlocked all the cards and put it together, and in my experience, this is running pretty smoothly. Once you've done that, the deck has, it's fun to play. It has a lot of answers for your opponent's different threats and so on. The only thing it doesn't have is if your opponent, like with Hunter Strength or something like that, if your opponent is able to continuously drop bombs or big creatures, then you're going to have to use everything you have, and you can't afford to be behind even a couple of turns. You need your Hands of Bindings, you need your Chittering Rats, you need your Ravenous Rats, you need everything to start, to drop from the early game. So you're behind on time if you're not removing creatures and tying down your opponent's side and so on from the get-go. And that's the only thing that's really bad about Masks of the Dimir. But same went for Rogue's Gallery in Magic 2013. It also had to get, it had to hit the ground running, or else it was just behind from the get-go because its creatures were not that impressive, and its removal spells were certainly not that impressive either. So yeah, but in that regard, it's not too different from this deck. Anyways, I'll be diving into the game and playing some matches online. So let's see if we can find some opponents. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Later.